Yana and you are watching YanaTV. And today we have an incredible guest, Yassmin Abdel-Magied, who has just developed an incredible speech at Women of Wealth and Abundance Conference. Yassmin is a TED Talk speaker. She's an engineer and humanitarian. How amazing is that? So thank you for coming to our show, Yassmin. We are highly appreciating it.
Thanks, Yana. I'm really excited.
And I just listened to your talk, and you were absolutely incredible. And I also learned that you have quite a life story.
Yeah, so a lot of people look at me and think, well, you know, you're just young, you're 24, 25, I just turned 25.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. What possibly could you tell the world? Like, what stories do you have to share? And I've been very fortunate in that. So I was born in Sudan. My family comes from a mix of different countries, Sudanese, Egyptian, bit of Turkish and Moroccan sprinkling. But we moved to Australia when I was just under 2 years old. And I had parents who played a really important role in my life because my mum was an activist in Sudan. It was just after the time that, you know, the government was overthrown. There was a new sort of group in power, and they were really trying to figure out. My mum, you know, wasn't really comfortable with how things were being done, and did everything she could to fight that. And she got in a bit of a tussle with the secret police. And my dad also, you know,
But she was carrying you, actually, right?
So mum was pregnant with me, and this is like an important part of the story, right? Mum was pregnant with me, and she's telling this story to people. I'm like, Mum, I was almost never born because you were too sassy and didn't like what the secret police did. So yeah, so she almost got taken in, and if you got taken in by the secret police, you know, you don't come out
in
whole.
Sudan.
In Sudan, yeah. And so my father's family sort of stood in and said, I think you guys should probably leave Sudan for a little while. So we came to Australia, and we actually were looked after by an Australian family that my mum had been pen pals with. My dad was an engineer in Sudan, and he looked for engineering work. We couldn't find anything, so we ended up moving to Singapore for a couple of years. So we've got a link to Singapore from back then. But really, you know, I had a childhood that was quite straightforward. You know, I went to a Muslim primary school and things were quite regular. My parents were always active in the community though. And we believed that because we had been given opportunities, because we'd been allowed, I suppose, to create this new life in Australia, we had an obligation to give back. And that's something that I've taken with me throughout my life. So when I was 16...
Hold on, before we go there. So when you moved to Australia from Sudan, right, when you were 2 years old and you were growing up, so what was the biggest challenge as a child who is so different to the country that you're moving to?
It's a good question. I think as a child, I probably looked at challenges not in the same way that I would have if I had come in a bit older. I kind of looked at it as a new adventure. And so we were the second Sudanese family in Brisbane.
Second.
You know, so we were quite a novelty. Like, people would be watching us walk down the street and be like, what are these people? Like, who are these people? Where are they even from? Because nobody had known Sudanese people. You know, it was the early 90s. We didn't have the internet, so you had no real exposure to what Sudan or Sudanese people were like. And I was this fat African baby with a big afro that just ran around and talked to lots of people all the time, got in trouble. But I think the challenge was kind of finding a balance between cultures. You know, the culture that my family came from in Sudan was very different to the culture in Australia. And to the expectations that came with that. I mean, we were lucky in that we had a language. At least my parents could speak English. I think it would have been incredibly difficult if they didn't. But, you know, we had to figure out I had to figure out what parts of my parents' culture I took on and what parts of the culture around me I took on, and finding that sort of third culture kid balance.
You know, that's actually a very good point. And I know like these days, it's a big topic actually, the third culture kids. You know, because our parents, you know, the world is more and more open.
Yeah.
There are less and less borders, right, among countries, and also technology helps us. So people tend to move around. So you're a great example of that generation of children who may be born in one country, grew up in a different country or in several different countries. So how does it feel then for you in terms of self-identity? And how do you decide, first of all, who you are and where do you belong to? And second, how do you decide what do you take from the culture of your parents, to what extent? And what you take from the surroundings?
Very good question.
Oh.
To be
Thank you.
To be honest, I think that's the crux of the identity challenge for my generation. The fact is that we don't live in a world where things are clear cut. You can't look around and be like, well, our way of viewing the world is the right way, because you know that there are other ways now. And so it's almost accepting there's more than one right way. For me, identity was always a tricky one, because even in Sudan, we're not fully considered Sudanese. My family, my dad's family originally was from Egypt, so we don't have a Sudanese tribe, and in Sudan it's very tribal. So we're even in Sudan, we're a mix, and in Australia, we're a mix. And so everywhere you go, you're a little bit different. And so I've almost found my identity as the outsider. I enjoy being someone who's different, because I think that if you're a little bit different, you can challenge the preconceived notions.
And you can get away with that when you're different, right?
Exactly.
Because people can't judge you based on your common background, because you don't have any common background.
And you don't have to adhere to what is considered the norm, right? If you're outside the norm, then how can you be expected to adhere to it? And so I think it's almost a gift to be an outsider. And it's something, when you're a kid, you don't want to be on the outside. When you're a kid, you want to be the same as everyone else. But once you start to realize the power of being an outsider and embracing that, you realize it's actually, you can do so much with it.
So you became an activist, right? You really were very passionate, I think, probably also because of your background. And I know you mentioned it, by the way, on stage, that you had very interesting topics for dinner conversations at home as a child, not the usual ones, not about, I don't know, SpongeBob and...
No. There was no light conversation about what you did at school. It was all about, what was happening in the Middle East and North Africa, and, the Sudanese government and the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and, when I was 10. And I think the fact is that we debated serious issues every night. And so it meant that from a young age, I was trained to think about things. I was trained to be aware of the world around me. And that's incredibly powerful. It's like a ballerina who trains from when they're 4-year-old to, by 24, they've done ballet for 20 years. In the same way, I've been discussing and thinking about issues to do with the world for 20 years.
Wow, you're like
I feel
super
established. People think you're so young. You're like, well, actually, I've been doing this for a while.
For 20 years.
Yes. Obviously it takes time for your skills to develop and for your understanding to develop. And when you're younger, you're usually more idealistic and all these sorts of things. But still, it's even just the debating process and the thinking about what point am I trying to make? How do I communicate that point? And not only to people of my age group, but people of different generations. Because when you're at the dinner table, you're dealing with people that are younger than you, your same age and older. So you have to learn how to communicate with people that are at those different levels.
So thank you, Yassmin, being such a great example of a kind of child, again, of the third culture kid, who made it so great in Australia, and now you're on your path, to even changing the world on a larger scale. So, when you look at your own life, and I'm sure you came across many times of other parents and other children, is there any kind of maybe advice you would like to give to both, to parents who may be raising third culture kids? What is the best way to do it so the children can actually step into their full potential and leave their kind of meaningful mark in the world? And also for children who have to somehow justify maybe in front of their parents that they will never be as, Sudanese, right, as your parents want you to be.
For the parents, I think, and I look at what my parents did, for the parents, it's about giving your children the space to create something new and believing in their ability and believing in what you have given them, the value set you've given them, believing that will get them through. And realizing that culture can change. And this is important. Culture is not a static thing. It's not something that's unchanging. We don't, Sudanese culture is not the same 500 years ago as it is today. So giving ourselves the room to realize culture can change. And we are the people that change culture. And our children are going to be the people, your children are going to be the people that change culture. And supporting that change wholeheartedly, I think is incredibly important. And I'm fortunate that my parents have supported me, that we've had to discuss it and debate it and argue it. But at the end of the day, they understand that, and they believe and they trust in my ability to hold true to the values that they taught me. To children or to the people my age.
Basically your peers.
To my peers. It's about not being afraid to do things differently and not being afraid, not being restricted by the expectations placed on you based on your gender or your faith or your race to challenge those and to think, well, okay, I might be young. I might have been born in a particular country, but that does not limit your ability to change. That does not limit your ability to have an impact in this world, to realize your full potential, whatever that is. So be prepared to take risks. Be prepared that not everything will work out, but to follow through and to be determined and to not let anyone tell you you can't do it.
Thank you so much, Yassmin. And that was Yassmin on YanaTV. Do you like this video? Share it with friends. We highly appreciate it. Join our mailing list. We always share amazing content. And stay with us. We're going to release another amazing episode next week.
In the world, according to ancient wisdom, according to the Bhagavad Gita, is created twice. First in the mind and then on ground. That until you can see yourself as the CEO, it's not going to happen. But when you can see it, when your heart feels it, then it will become a reality.